Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready to take a ride in the Ferris wheel show? Prepare yourself for some serious rock talk.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to another fine episode of the Ferris Wheel.
Hello.
Hello. I'm one of your hosts, co-conspirators and co-creator, Ferris Kennedy. In the booth next to me, the man who had Johnny Mathis as his best man at his second wedding.
That's good. Dr. Ian Clark.
And the man in the other booth who's with Armando today. Armando's back from his holidays.
Stephen Wheeler.
As you may know, Stephen Wheeler has appeared in many episodes of The Golden Girls. So,
As a golden girl.
he was. I think he played
Sophia.
Yeah, leave Dorothy alone. She was my favorite. So today we've got something very interesting. This is Island Discs, and I'm going to let the good Reverend next to me lead us into what the concept is.
Thank you very much. Well, most of you out there have heard the term Desert Island Disc. And I think it's a BBC show for years, but it's you know what it is? It becomes a personal expression of music that's important to you, the individual. And that's where it begins and that's where it ends. It's not necessarily so-called popular music that made, the billboard, but for whatever reason, it's important to you. Often because certain songs and albums arrived at certain periods in your life, and they mark something, usually pleasant. And so if someone said to you, well, if you had to go off on a desert island for a few years, what, for instance, 10 albums, not songs, but 10 albums would you take with you? And that's where and it's a real discipline. The listeners, you should try it. It's not easy. And it's just kind of it's almost a bit Freudian, because it tells you what you were thinking at the time. Music's very powerful that way. And it's kind of like a map to your yesteryears. Keeping that in mind, when you were putting your list together, Ferris, I think you did take the personal route, didn't you?
I did, and I had a hard time after getting 5 or 6 albums in.
Right.
And I did take the personal route because a lot of it has been personal to me through family and friends.
Sure.
Nothing, knock on wood, nothing ever tragic happened that I had to relate to a certain album. It's just something I really appreciated. So I took the personal route on it.
Sure. Did you want to talk a little bit about that, like an overview of how?
Yeah, I do. And this is what I want to talk about. And I'm going to use the quote from the good old Reverend. Sure. Dear listeners, what defines someone on who or what they listen to? There are many walks of life on this earth, and there are numerous music genres. We have music for all ages and all kinds. Growing up as a child and into my young adolescence, people were always being identified or labeled by their taste of music. We identified individuals as rappers, rockers, metalheads, punks, surfers, hippies, rednecks, and the grunge kid in my generation. Before my era, did they refer to crooners, disco ducks, and intellectuals? They probably did, but it was not as advertised as it is today. In the late 40s and early 50s, nobody would label you for liking Sinatra or Dean Martin. They may have called you a rebel for liking Johnny Cash, or maybe inferior for listening to disco. At the end of it all, music is all relative. And in my view, you'll learn to appreciate as you get older. Now, I'm not going out and picking out a Charlie Pride album or the next James Taylor album, but I'm proud to say that my musical palette is more fluid than the average Joe.
Very well put.
Very deep.
That's great, man.
Deep and profound.
Well, that's what I was saying. It's about music has this bizarre kind of power that other mediums, not even film, have. I don't know what it is. It's almost like a sense of smell. And it is personal. And I can remember pretending to like music, which was cool in my group, which I didn't like. And the flip side, kind of lowballing or even, hiding music, so to speak, that I did like.
So guilty pleasures.
Yeah, guilty pleasures. So anyway, that for listeners, that was our challenge, and to put a personal list of 10 albums together that we would truck off to this so-called desert island. And do you want me to begin? And
yeah, because this is something that you brought up, and
Sure.
It was very challenging. It took me, I'd say, a good 3 I had to sleep on it another weekend or so to get my list.
Yeah, you always start like the first 2 or 3. Yeah, and you go, I don't know about this.
And then it's like, oh, do I really bring this one?
I know. I'm gonna get so sick of this album.
Yeah, I'll use it to like draw. I don't know, with the sun to maybe burn something.
I think Didn't Tom Hanks do that in one of his Castaway movies? Yeah. So the first album I chose is an album which I discovered probably when I was about 15. So a number of years after it was released. But when I heard it, it just blew me out of the water, and that's the Beatles' Abbey Road from 1969. And that album, both sides are so good that I think it's the Beatles' best album, and not Sgt. Pepper and not Revolver and all the other stuff. I think it's Abbey Road, and I will take that with me to this island. Abbey Road, 1969, produced by George Martin. Listen to these songs that are on there. Come Together, Something, Maxwell Silver Hammer, Oh Darling, Octopus's Garden. I Want You, She's So Heavy. Here Comes the Sun, Because You Never Give Me Your Money. Sun King, Mean Mr. Mustard, Polyethylene Pam. She Came In Through the Bathroom Window. Golden Slumbers, Carry That Weight. The End, Her Majesty. Every song's good. And for that alone, I'm taking it. But the production's excellent. There's something about that album, even now, is just pure magic for me. And God knows how many times I've heard it. The second album I take with me, I mentioned in a previous show. In fact, if you listen to our Woodstock show, which I hope you do follow up on, is Tapestry, 1971, Carole King, until Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, the biggest selling album of all time. Produced by a guy named Lou Adler. Interesting cat, the guy that discovered the Mamas and Papas, excuse me, produced the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Very strange type of guy, but right place, right time, and talented. In fact, he had a great big mansion in Los Angeles, which he used to call the house that Tapestry built. Made a lot of money off of it. Tapestry, let's look at the songs on. I Feel the Earth Move, So Far Away, It's Too Late, Home Again, Beautiful, Way Over Yonder, You've Got a Friend, Where You Lead, Will You Love Me Tomorrow, Smackwater Jack, Tapestry, of course, and You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman. All these songs are great songs, both sides. I remember when my older sister brought this home, and I think I wore it out. Probably because the record player, was more of a knurler than anything. I think it spun wax off of the cartridges. Then were so heavy. The third album I'd go for is Paul McCartney, 1973, Band on the Run. McCartney, this is his best post-Beatle album. He's admitted that. He knows it. It all came together for him. The Beatles only broke up about 3 years later, really about 3.5. And he still got that Beatles vibe going. And every song's great. Band on the Run, Jet, Bluebird, Mrs. Vanderbilt, Let Me Roll It, Mammonia, No Words, Helen Wheels, Picasso's Last Words. These are all great songs. And I remember, it certainly will date me, but again, one of my sisters got the 8-track to this, and I used to play it in the car until the bloody 8-track broke, which they all did once it got a little cold. They were all horrible technology. Thank God for cassettes. Next album up, I mentioned before in our podcast, is one of my favorites, and that's Pet Sounds from 1966, one of the most influential albums of all time, written and produced by Brian Wilson. Listen to these songs. Wouldn't It Be Nice? You Still Believe in Me? That's Not Me. Don't Talk, Put Your Head on My Shoulder. Sloop John B. I Just Wasn't Made for These Times. Caroline, No. Every song is great on this album, and the production's outstanding. It's so creative and inventive. I'm not going to get tired on that album, on that island, rather, listen to this album. It just, every year I go through about a one-day Pet Sounds kind of run. Well, I'll put it on. And there is something about it. Somebody once said, you won't get a more kind of melancholy, happy album. Everything seems to be written in a major key, but it's sad. Who knows why? But Brian Wilson is part of the genius. Next album I would take is Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Elton John, 1973, produced by the late, great Gus Dudgeon. I saw Elton John tour this, and it's the single best concert I've ever seen in my life. He opened up with Funeral for a Friend / Love Lies Bleeding. Wow. And when you open up with that, he got a standing ovation. You could make an opera based on those two songs. Candle in the Wind, Benny and the Jets, Goodbye Old Brick Road. It just goes on and on. Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting, Harmony. These are all amazing songs. It's a double album, and every song is great. I'm not going to get sick of it.
Is this before or after you dressed up as Donald Duck for the concerts?
That's before.
That's before.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Elton's career there's a strange amplitude to it. This is really his peak, and he's often said if he could get back and do anything close to Yellow Brick Road, he'd have it made again.
Is Border Song on that one?
No.
Okay.
That's previous to that. This is a double album, and it's very rare that it's, everything can be strong. God knows what he left off. And, of course, the Elton John band was formed around this album. The late Dee Murray and Davy Johnson and Nigel, of course, on drums. The next selection is the band with eponymously named The Band from 1969. Co-produced by a guy named John Simon. Probably the rest was produced by Robbie Robertson. Across the Great Divide, Rag My Rag, The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, King Harvest, Rockin' Chair. Great albums. You want a great band album, pick this up. This is their second. The first one was called Music for the Big Pink. The next one I go with is by Roxy Music, 1983, called Avalon, produced by Roxy and a guy named Rhett Davies. This is a great album. A lot of hits off it. A lot of these songs have been used in soundtracks, I know. And bass heavy, and I think it set the tone for Brian Ferry's, his individual career post-Roxy. Or sometimes he went back to Roxy too. But that kind of very sensual, laid-back feeling to it, very well produced. I would take Avalon with me. You're not going to get tired of it.
And I think I've heard also it's used a lot in high-end stores when they want to test the system.
Oh yeah,
because there's so many variations. It's bass heavy in some. It's really soft in others. And apparently, if you want to hear all the colors, that's where they'll sell you the one that's for the Ferrari.
No, plus they'll use that to make even the system sound better.
Exactly.
For a time, here's micro trivia. They used to use an album called Breezin' by George Benson. It was so well recorded, every shop in Toronto, where I grew up, they would use George Benson because even a crummy album would sound, even a crummy set rather, would sound pretty good. And Steely Dan, any Steely Dan, is just so well recorded. It's absurd. To keep going, I would bring along a copy of The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. A guy named David Bowie from 1972. Again, my sister brought this home, God love her. And this album is so freaking good that I just played it literally till it wore out, and I had to buy another copy, which was a lot back then, $5 for a new album. 5 years, Soul Love, Moon Age Daydream, Starman, Lady Stardust, Ziggy Stardust, Suffragette City, Rock and Roll Suicide. Everything's great in this album. It made David Bowie a star. After that, he really could do no wrong. He did, actually, in the 80s. But during the 70s, he was a minor god, David Bowie. I would take along a copy of L.A. Woman, the last album put out by The Doors in 1971. Co-produced with them a guy named Bruce Botnick, who's still around. Bruce Botnick was their engineer. Their original producer walked out. He didn't like the songs they were doing, and so Bruce took over. Great album. Few songs, maybe not quite their peak, but overall, it starts with The Changeling, which is a very kind of funky beat to it, and it ends with Riders on the Storm. And God knows how many copies there have been of L.A. Woman, so to speak. My last entry is one that is very idiosyncratic. And I mentioned in the preface to this whole podcast that these may not be albums that, are particularly well known or always in the Rolling Stones top 100. These are personal albums. For some reason, they feel close to the heart. And that is an album called More of the Monkees by the Monkees, 1967. Again, one of my sisters brought it home. And it is a great album. I mean, you'll know some of the songs. Mary Mary, covered by Paul Butterfield. I'm a Believer, which you'll see in every movie now. Sometime in the Morning. Yeah, these are... Give it a listen. Listen to people these are the producers of that album. I don't know how you have so many producers. Tommy Boyce, Bobby Hart, Neil Sedaka, Carol Bersager, who went on to marry Burt Bacharach, Mike Nesmith, Jeff Berry, Carole King, Jerry Goffin. These are the producers of that album. So it's hard to go wrong. Anyway, if I took all those albums along and I had a good system to play them, I'd probably be okay for a few years.
Just a few. I'm actually surprised on maybe two of yours because knowing us, the three of us, Abbey Road doesn't surprise me. Pet Sounds definitely. I knew you were going to bring that one. The Ziggy Stardust one threw me off. Yeah, a little bit, just because I know you, and I'm going to be honest. And I know you're open to a lot of stuff. I'm probably going to say the Roxy Music threw me off.
Yeah, I thought Roxy Music, I think that is personal. I think it came at a particular time in my life, and Brian Ferry, excuse me, is an interesting cat. He really stood out. Roxy Music is kind of the glam era of in England, where you had T-Rex, and you had David Bowie and Slade and all these kind of glam guys. Gary Glitter, and what he did is he morphed into this kind of a crooner, which I've always loved when these guys kind of get almost faux romantic. And he put out an album by himself. I think it's called These Foolish Things. I really advise people to pick it up. Amazing album. Before it was cool to cover the classic American songbook, which everybody does now, from Rod Stewart to Carly Simon, name it. He was the first Brian Ferry. It's a great album. So he has this kind of a laid-back lounge lizard, almost like a modern Bobby Darin or something. And I really fell in love with it. Plus, as we're saying, the sound of this album is so good. It was so unique for the time when it came out. There weren't a lot of guys that sounded like that. What about you?
Well, yeah, I went obviously the personal route, and my albums are somewhat similar, I guess, into sound of what Ian brought up. Yeah. So my first album, I took Lenny Kravitz, Are You Gonna Go My Way, which was released March 9th, 1993 by Virgin Records, recorded at the Waterfront Studios in Hoboken, New Jersey by your old buddy Henry Hirsch.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
And obviously it's got big hits like Are You Gonna Go My Way, Believe, Heaven Help, Just Be a Woman. There's a lot of John Lennon influence in this album if you listen to it. Yeah, right. Eleutheria, which is the last song on the album, is got some interesting vibe to it. And for me, this album has changed my life incredibly. It made me appreciate rock and roll and moved me out of gangster rap and into the music I have learned to appreciate today. It opened my ears to the grunge, classic rock, and the old school rock and roll my parents would listen to. Now, I still listen to rap and hip hop, but it's more in the old school rap, and there's no mumble rap for this Kennedy. I'll tell you that right now. Okay. Moving into the second album that I would bring, and like you said, when you list off the first three, it's so easy
yeah.
So I chose Young MC, Stone Cold Rhyming. It was released in September 5th of 89 by Delicious Vinyl, and later it was known as Rhino Records. It was produced by the legend himself, Quincy Jones, and the Dust Brothers. And this one in particular, it was at a point in my life where I was in school, and he was playing a student in all of his videos. So I Come Off is one of the songs that just introduces himself of who he is. Principal's Office was probably one of the best ones of the videos where he's literally getting caught for everything you could possibly think of. Yeah. Bust a Move, which everyone likes. Non-stop, he just keeps rhyming and rhyming. Fastest Rhyme. Now, we played this in the first season on the Rap Official. It's 49 seconds of literally, I would say, probably like 1,000 words that he just goes off it just rhymes it off. My name is Young gives him, a definition of who he really is. There's a lot of songs on this album that I love, and this was one of my first cassettes I ever owned. And then later, I was able to find it on CD at a pawn shop for $5. And I still have it to this day. And it's one of the most inspiring albums with pure rhymes, no swearing, no foul language,
Right.
just old school English with proper grammar in every song, sort of. And then the videos were innocent and pure, and the tracks were solid and fun to try to memorize. For those who listened to our Rap Official show in season 1, like I just said, we played the fastest rhyme, and it did not disappoint. The way the words flow, it's just pure genius. The third album that I would bring, and I'm sure this didn't surprise anybody, I would bring Nirvana Nevermind, which was released in September 24th, 1991 by DCG Records, which produced by your old buddy Butch Vig.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So obviously, I don't need to say much when you say Smells Like Teen Spirit, In Bloom, Come As You Are, Breed, Lithium, Polyum, and then Territorial Pissings, Drain. Like, this just keeps going.
No, it's the kind of high point. It's a high watermark for grunge.
It is, and this is my all-time favorite album. I heard this album when my childhood friend Mark shared it with me, and I was secretly in love with it. I was in a period of my life where lots of rap was being listened to, and to refer to my Lenny Kravitz album that broke my barrier when that Pandora's box was open, I unleashed my true love for grunge and Nirvana. I love this album from start to finish. I can listen to it at all the time, anytime, while at the gym or even in my vehicle. And it's one of those albums that has to be at max volume. This album was the starting point of my life that brought me into the grunge days.
Cool.
Okay. So obviously, needless to say, leading off from Nirvana to no surprise, Foo Fighters, which was released July 4th, 95.
Yeah.
Roswell and Capitol Records, recorded at your favorite studio in Seattle, the Robert Lang Studio.
Sure.
And it's produced by the genius himself, Grohl and Barrett Jones. Just from the start, this is a call, stick around, Big Me, Alone and Easy Target, For All the Cows. It's no surprise that I love this album, and with good reason. Obviously, it's no secret that David Grohl is my favorite drummer of all time, and was the second drummer for the most iconic band in the grunge era. This album was a spin-off to his Nirvana days, already writing songs while in the band. Grohl wrote all his music and lyrics to this album, played every instrument known to man, and did this to show the world he is not just a rhythm portion of a band he played in. From start to finish, this album displays range from hard-hitting songs to a few mellow ones to show your versatility. One of the songs I love on this album is For All the Cows.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did that for the Foo Fighters one.
did
You were impressed
Oh,
with that
yeah,
one.
yeah. I interject very quickly. It's interesting. When you said that he was involved writing music with Nirvana and kind of bridged into this album, a lot of the early Beatles, post-Beatles stuff by the Beatles, like especially Harrison and McCartney, some of their post-Beatles songs they actually were writing when they were with the Beatles. It's no surprise to me that they're good because they were still under the influence of that band, and so the Beatles broke up, and suddenly that's why their best stuff is always so close to the Beatle breakup. I've always had this kind of theory that it's like a kinetic force. The momentum's behind you, and you keep going. So with Dave Grohl, he's surrounded by he's with a really good songwriter, right? Yeah. And so he starts to write songs, and Cobain says, "Keep going." Cobain, unfortunately passes away, but the momentum's still there. So the first album is almost always the best. Not to say Foo Fighters, but you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Often it is. The Doors were certainly like that. A lot of, ladies and gentlemen, maybe you can concur with me, but with rock bands, their first one or two albums are the best. They just are.
And they trickle off after.
Yeah, they kind of trickle off. And they've been rehearsing in bars, nightclubs, and so when they hit the bricks, they're really good. By the third album, they got to really write their stuff on the road, and often not as good.
Then the next album I decided to bring is the Bare Naked Ladies, Gordon, which was released in 92 of July 28 by it was recorded at Le Studio Morin Heights in Quebec.
Which I think just burned down a few months ago.
Really?
I think so.
So this album was released in the summer, and I heard it all summer long while I was preparing for grade 9. How fitting is that, considering grade 9 was one of their hits? I remember my father calling me downstairs on a midsummer afternoon during the holidays and watching much music. I could still remember him shouting, "Ferris, come and check out this new Canadian band. They have a funny name to them." I ran downstairs and was memorized with the song Enid. And the voice of Stephen Page, such a distinct voice, which to me is one of the best voices in rock music today. Throughout my years of appreciating music, Stephen Page is so underrated, and for those who know about him, enjoy his music, this album was an integral part of my youth, as I can relate to all of the life experiences they wrote about, and growing up in Canada, we can relate to working in the summer, cutting grass to make money, going to funerals of people that died, falling in love, all these little things.
And of course, Brian Wilson.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of my favorite songs.
Hey.
So,
Be my Yoko Ono.
Well, by the way, when this was released, I can remember listening to it when it was only available on cassette.
I started off with cassette, and then I was able to
they weren't big enough yet to cut LPs.
So
There you
then
go.
I decided to bring you to The Joshua Tree, which was released March 9th, 1987 by Island Records, recorded in the STS studios in Dublin, Ireland, and produced by your friends Daniel Lanois and Brian Eno.
Sure.
So what is there not to like about this album? From start to finish, this album was the album that solidified U2's place in rock and roll history. When you have an album which was released for a 20th anniversary and then just recently a 30th anniversary, how can we not have this album in our collection? It is U2's best album and has displayed their creativity as a band with their own unique sound. They sell out everywhere they go, and we have failed to mention that they are a safe band and are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
And we could say it's the last really good one that they put out.
That's all they
Yeah.
needed to do to solidify themselves, right?
Yeah, that's their last really good one. You're right.
So the next album that I would bring is Bryan Adams' Reckless. It was released in '84. Good old A&M Records, which I don't know if it's still around anymore. But just from the start,
Herb
like,
Albert.
you know, one night love affair. She's only happy when she's dancing. Run to You, Heaven, Somebody, Summer '69. It's Only Love with Tina Turner. How can you not think that I would not bring my favorite artist of all time and his second studio album? This was another one of my first ever cassettes, and having it on digital with the 30th anniversary edition. It's like an Amex. Never leave home without it. What does this album mean to me? Quite simple. Bryan Adams is my favorite musician, and he's Canadian and has been a staple in Canadian music for more than 30 years. He is now classified as a living legends category, as he is highly respected but on an international level. I've seen him in concert 6 times, and I can remember each show how he does. I can watch them over and over. I was at his 30th anniversary Reckless tour, and it did not disappoint. As a youth, Bryan Adams' songs were always there for me. They gave me what I wanted in classic rock. He met the criteria of 1966 to 1983. But for Adams, I am biased, never denied it, so I could bend the rules for him slightly.
Sure.
The next album, obviously personal too, is Michael Jackson Thriller, which was released by Epic Records in 1982. And this is actually the first vinyl my mom ever bought for me, was Michael Jackson's Thriller. And I still have it till this day, and it is stored nicely on a shelf in my parents' home with easy access. How can anyone not have the most sold album of all time? This album is the album of my childhood. Every home I lived in, this album has followed me and been there through every great party. 9 epic songs that start up any party. When Billie Jean goes on, I moonwalk, no joke. One of the most iconic albums in music history. There is a reason why he was the king of pop. I have this album on vinyl, cassette, digital, CD, and the 25th anniversary edition on CD, also with compilations with other artists who did not make my list.
And produced by Quincy Jones.
The other album that I was bringing, and obviously you guys had no surprise on this one, was Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction. Good old Geffen Records, right?
Sure.
Yeah, 1987. And I got introduced to this gem of an album in grade 4. Mike Henry, who I went to school with, and I still keep in touch via Facebook, came into French class and he had this cassette in his pocket. In the classroom, there was a deck player, and he had made sure that the song to set go was My Michelle. Not the Beatles version, but the Guns N' Roses version, and it was like the rebel in us came out, as there was profanity in the song, which was unacceptable at any time. But fast forward to a time in my life where I can comprehend. I love this album, as it's heavy, and the songs just go. Another album you can work out with and drive with the volume up. And Slash is legendary and the greatest guitarist in my mind. Sweet Child of Mine, one of the big hits on that album, has to be the best guitar riff ever. Seeing them live really made me appreciate them even more, and I'm glad that they came into an early stage in my life. Even though they were on hold for 2 years while I was in the rap phase, they came back pretty quick, and then they decided to take a 24-year break and come back. The next album is one produced by Rick Rubin. So Red Hot Chili Peppers' Blood Sugar Sex Magic. It was released in 1991 on September 24th, and it was produced one of the greatest producers of all times next to Quincy Jones, none other than Rick Rubin. Obviously, most listeners would know that Rubin is one of my favorite producers, as this album was introduced to me to my final 2 years of high school in a music class. This album was played over and over by some of my classmates during music class, and they were trying to emulate the guitar chords of Under the Bridge. Needless to say, I would also have the opportunity to listen to it with my childhood friend Mark, who had this album, and he lived behind my house growing up. We would share albums, and he lent it to me. I didn't want to give it back, as I was fascinated by the album, the artwork, and the music. I did end up buying my own because I couldn't find it in a pawn shop, but at the time I saved my money and bought it at A&A Music. We all remember them, don't we, Ian?
Certainly, and Son of Sam, too. I mean, Sam the Record Man.
And then, to close it off, I did a bonus album, so I cheated, right? So I said here, bonus album while no one was looking before I embarked on this island with only 10 albums. I snuck one into my secret hiding spot. Doesn't matter where I snuck it in. But I just
want to know what your secret hiding spot is.
Decided
but it's not going to fit an album.
Maybe
it will.
I decided to take Metallica's Black Album, which was released.
That's where it belongs.
Because it was released in 1991. And God love my childhood friend Mark, who was a great musical influence on some of my albums I own today. Being a guitarist, Mark that is, he had an ear for playing chords and riffs. Wouldn't take him long to master it. Well, this album we definitely enjoyed listening to at parties, in the car, or even working out. I can't say there was an impact on my life for this album, but it did end up in my brother's disc player growing up. So at least I know I introduced him to something good that he could reflect on. Like my good friend Dr. Ian Clark would say, albums should be 10 songs, and 8 of them have to be good to be serious contenders of being a solid album.
That's true.
Well, there are 12 songs on this, and 6 of them rock, so we could find 2 more to fit the good reverence criteria.
Not bad, man.
And I think the two of you have shown something. It's the importance of good friends and siblings when we're young.
You know, that's a really neat observation because a lot of, in life in general, it's serendipity. You just discover things by chance. You can't plan. How often have I gone into a record store, and I remember the old thing used to be, if you can't find anything, go under the B section. Because after the Beatles and the Beach Boys, a lot of bands tried to start their name with a B, so they could bung into that section. And so I remember going and Sam the Record Man at Dundas and Young, I guess, in Toronto, and flipping through Bs to find what was there, B-52s, whatever it was.
The Birds.
The Bird, yeah. They're little, but you'd often find them in the B section by chance. The idea is that often you're looking for something else, and you come across something great. How often does that happen to you? You're searching on the internet for a song, and you go, oh, really? She did that? And off you go to a different place, so...
But it's very hard because you even sing Bees. I could think of 2 bands that I would bring. The Beastie Boys.
Sure.
Bee Gees.
Bee Gees. I'll probably bring the Bee Gees too, you know. Yeah. What's interesting too is that, you know, on this island we are alone, right? Because even though we're buddies and we share a lot of taste, when it comes down to personal music, often it is very personal music, and if I forced my cohorts here to, listen to, I don't know, some of my albums, they'd probably skin me alive.
Well, you wanted to disembowel me with a penknife.
Yeah, well, that was for Metallica.
And you too.
Yeah, you too. I'm probably okay, but if you play it twice in a year, yeah, it could be a homicide.
New Year's Day.
See, that's the beauty of being on a desert island. It's full of beaches, so you can bury them in the sand.
and release the red ants.
All right, Wheels, what are you bringing to this wonderful island?
Okay, so I went with albums that I tend to listen to at least once a year. They're not necessarily the ones you would think of when you mentioned the band, but they are the works that make you work a little sometimes. But I find that they get better as you listen to them. So my first one is from Pink Floyd, but it's not the one most people would think of. I'm bringing "Wish You Were Here."
Yeah.
That came out in '75.
Sure.
And ironically, it's been called by both Gilmour and Wright their favorite album. But okay, so it's not Dark Side of the Moon. It could never be, really.
Not even Dark Side of the Moon can be Dark Side of the Moon.
Exactly.
It's the mythology in that thing.
And so it's been perpetually underrated ever since. And I think it's a pity because it is much more concise in terms of their albums from the 70s. And Gilmour in particular went a lot deeper on this album. The musical themes are much more progressive. They even fashion to a great extent what came out in prog rock circles with this album for a long time. And what's really nice I find on this one is that they mention Syd Barrett, which at that point had been completely relegated to the sands of time. He had burned his brain out in the late 60s. And so a lot of bands, they would say, well, he's done for, let's forget about him. They actually wrote an entire, we could call it a rock opera. Shine On You Crazy Diamond is just like a beautiful salute to this lost genius. And
to add trivia to that, while they were recording it, Syd Barrett walked into the studio.
Oh, isn't that the time when they saw that he had, was he gained weight or lost a lot of weight?
He didn't look himself. He'd shaved his head, and they didn't know who he was. He just stood there, and he said, "I'm ready to play." And Gilmour, who was his closest buddy, gently let him out of the studio.
Yeah. Which is a really sad thing when you think about it.
He founded Pink Floyd.
Exactly, yeah.
Was it him and Roger Waters?
Pretty well.
Yeah.
They're actually called the Pink Floyd.
I'm not surprised you're bringing a Floyd album, Wheels.
Yeah, well, I mean, on it, there's Wish You Were Here, which is also like their most enduring composition. They have Welcome to the Machine and Have a Cigar, which, when you think about it, these guys were making millions. And on this album, they're basically giving the middle finger to the record industry.
Yeah, well, a lot of this, even today, Waters he's kind of a confrontatious guy, you know. So sometimes, like The Wall, when he gives an interview, actually, I was looking at today, in which he's lambasting Richard Branson of Virgin for trying to organize a concert to help. Was it Argentina? Some country. And he's a bitter guy. So whenever I see, when I hear kind of those type of comments about now, I'm thinking Waters is behind it.
Usually, yeah.
Usually.
And we can say of him that he's the other name we give to people called Richards.
Yeah. Okay.
This is a family show, so we'll keep it clean. So my next one is another one from a very known band, but it's not necessarily, again, an album you would think of when you mentioned them. So I would bring Beggar's Banquet from the Rolling Stones.
Choice.
It came out in '68, and it's probably the album that showed 60s bands really, really happy that psychedelic just was finished at that point. Because they had been going in every direction. They came out with great songs in the psychedelic era, but the albums themselves were a little chaotic. And on this one, basically, they reconnect with the roots music, for example, on Jigsaw Puzzle, and with Stray Cat Blues, Street Fighting Man, Sympathy for the Devil. It's like basically they're rediscovering their blues artists within themselves. And it's also a very sad album because it's the one where Brian Jones is basically providing his own epitaph with no expectations, which is a really desolate slide guitar, which is probably the last time we'll hear that on a Stones album forever.
It was a strange, the psychedelic movement didn't work for the Stones. They tried it, right? And they made the worst album of their lives. It was so bad. What was the name of that album? It's not
Their Satanic Majesties.
Quest. Was that the one they had Dandelion on? And 2000.
Oh, I like Dandelion. Yeah, I like that song.
Dandelion. And yeah, with this album, they kind of got their new sound, kind of a roadhouse grind with what they call the Rolling Stone mix, where you pull the guitars up to the front and you pull back the vocals. So you can never really understand what Mick Jagger's saying. And they kept that mix for the next 30 years.
Well, and they also, like, I think it's also the album where they become adults. Like, they went from being, like, the dirty teenagers that the antithesis of this is squeaky clean Beatles. And with this album, they basically become real blues artists.
Yeah, they become they're more of a genuine concept. They had Andrew Lowe Oldham out of their lives at that point, so they were a little more freedom.
So the next one is for those days where on our desert island, those 4 days in the year where it's going to rain.
Yeah.
I brought Nina Simone's "I Put a Spell on You."
Oh, sure.
Jeez, that's interesting.
Well, I mean, it's the most famous album of Nina Simone and of a jazz artist, a female jazz artist of the 60s, really. And it's insanely emotional. The interpretations on there's a little bit of everything. There's some soul, there's some jazz, there's some blues. The most bizarre pronunciation I've ever heard of French. 'Cause she does a Jacques Brel song, and it works, ironically. Usually Jacques Brel is one of those composers you should never touch his music with a 10-foot pole for the simple and good reason they were written for him.
Yeah.
And you'll basically break your teeth every time you'll try it, except Nina Simone. Mostly because probably she sings French in a way that it becomes a new language.
She had a lot of power. And she had a minor hit, so to speak, with "Wild as the Wind," and of course, which was reinterpreted by David Bowie and about 20,000 other people. But Simone was the first one to, I don't know, I could say popularize "Wild as the Wind," and her version is interesting. A lot of energy behind her singing.
And I find it really interesting when you listen to that album. The most known song on that album, and probably by Simone, is "I Put a Spell on You."
Yeah.
And it has absolutely nothing to do with her usual repertoire. Because it was composed by crazy jazz man Screaming Jay Hawkins.
Yeah, Screaming Jay Hawkins' one and only hit, and CCR had a minor hit with it.
Exactly. And closer to us, there's Diamanda Gallis, who redid it, and Marilyn Manson, of all people.
It works for him, though, right? Because it's one of those kind of swamp, eerie, voodoo things. So, which is Screaming Jay Hawkins' whole act.
Exactly, yeah. So basically, Nina Simone, because she's an amazing interpreter, she has impressive arrangements because she's actually a classical pianist by trade, and she had beautiful vocal interpretation, and you could hear the sadness of her life in her music.
Yeah,
It looks like she needed a man or something.
Oh, she had a lot of men. That was the problem.
She had the right one.
Exactly.
Type,
Maybe Marilyn Manson could have dated her.
So my next one, again, big name, not necessarily the album you'd think of. So Blood on the Tracks from 75. So most people call it the breakup album of Dylan's career, mostly because that's about the time where he divorced his first wife. And I love the stuff he did in the 60s, but it tends to date itself sometimes. It's very folky. This one is a lot more open. There's a lot of experimental narrative. You listen to a lot of these songs, and they've aged rather well. And he's not mumbling too much yet. So it's a more mature voice, less squeaky. And I think it's the one album by Dylan that will age the least, if we can call it that. Like, it's more like a good wine than a shitty beer kind of situation.
Yeah, they call it his last great album.
Exactly. The next one is, again, a little out there. It's London Calling by The Clash.
sure.
That
Double
came-
album.
That's a good album.
But-
Is it a double album?
It's a double
yeah,
album.
you're very smart man. You brought a double album.
And the reason why I took this one is basically, again, a little like Nina Simone, it goes in every possible direction.
Yeah.
So you got some R&B, you got some rockabilly, some reggae, some jazz, and some pop. And I mean, it's just genre busting kind of an album. And it's their best, I think.
Without it's super influential too. I don't know, every party you went into in that time, what was that, 80?
1979, so 1980s
79.
probably here.
Yeah, in 1980 it had that album.
Yeah.
And, Should I Stay or Should I... All these great songs were on it. And the cover's classic too,
Exactly, yeah.
with the guy smashing it.
I mean, it's 4 sides, 19 songs, 65 minutes, which was huge for the time.
Sure.
Especially considering they were from a punk background originally. But you've got some reggae with the Guns of Brixton. You've got Death for Glory, which is basically a middle finger to leftover 60s rockers. Train in Vain. It doesn't let up. Like the entire album is basically a huge caffeine hit for your ears.
Yeah, it was good.
The next one is music to, what was the expression? Music to cut your wrists?
Slash your wrist.
Slash your wrist by. So Leonard Cohen's Songs of Leonard Cohen, which came out in 67.
Yeah.
Very, very poetic.
At this point, I mean,
Sand takes you
exactly.
down.
See, this one you don't need really
Gives
tight
you
pants to
milk
sing.
and honey.
Because it's a really warm album, though, when you think about it. And his baritone, I mean, to a certain extent, you can say Cohen raps because he doesn't really sing.
Yeah, they used to call it makeout albums because Leonard Cohen had like 4 or 5 chords, and all his songs are based on changing them around. And over it, he would do this kind of chant. And all his songs are like that. That's why he covers so well by
Mhm.
people who can actually sing. And his first album, you got to remember, he was in his early 30s. He started late because he had written poetry and was a published novelist. And so he wasn't making any money. So he said, I got to kind of get into this songwriting gig. And that's how he did it in the Chelsea Hotel. And he came out with this really a strong album. Probably, I hate to say it, probably his best.
To a great extent. And plus, I mean, it's been one of the more diverse on it. You can hear, other than the guitar, bells, keyboards, strings, horns, and even a Jew's harp, which is rather rare in rock and roll.
Yeah, it sure is.
And, I mean, it covers everything from lust to love to sex to religion.
Sounds like Cohen, yeah.
Exactly. And it so those of you who've never heard necessarily of this album, you'll know that there's So Long Marianne on it, and you'll know probably the Stranger Song and Joan of Arc, which are probably the hits off the album. The next one is the Fugees with The Score, which came out in 96, with the trio Wycliffe Jean, Price Michael, and Lauryn Hill. And basically, to a certain extent, it was a really interesting album in the sense that it was very 90s, but it was very 70s at the same time. For example, Killing Me Softly was actually a hit in the 70s.
Yeah, well, the early 70s.
the early
with
70s.
There's a
Roberta
few
Flack.
remakes on this album, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they did a good. Lauryn Hill did a good version of. Well, the Fugees did a good version of that. And there's a video where they're joined on stage by Roberta Flack.
Yeah, well, exactly, which
really
is the
cool.
legend. And actually, that's one of the critiques of this album, that it had too many covers. But I'm one of those people who thinks that their version of Killing Me Softly and No Woman, No Cry is actually up there with the originals.
Sure.
I'll second that for sure. I have the album, and it's a good album.
Yeah, I don't know. The Roberta Flack, whatever. I'm not gonna.
No, I'm gonna go with No Woman No Cry. They did. They nailed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Roberta Flack, that was an interesting. She didn't write it, but boy, that song. There's something about that song. Killing Me Softly. That was a huge hit.
And the other thing about this album, which is really nice too, that it goes, it crosses every boundary of music at that time. So it's not really based on gender, since it's 2 men and a woman, and neither voices really win out. It's always a collaboration. It's not bound by geography because they do tend to put a lot of island sounds in there.
Yeah.
They are reinventing hip hop to a certain extent, which at this point had like one really dominating sound, and they brought so many other influences. Unfortunately, it's also, I think, the last time we heard the Fugees as a really working ensemble.
Yeah.
But I've heard that apparently they're under contract for 3 more albums.
I see. Interesting.
My next one is Manu Chao, Proxima Estación Esperanza, which nobody here knows, more or less.
I think you made it up, actually.
Yeah, it sounds like you just threw darts at an alphabet board and just came up with this name.
So basically, he was really big in Europe and Latin America. It did run a little in the U.S. in 2001, but mostly on international stations, and I think it was in a few movies. But it's basically a very like he's a rock god in South America. Like he's up there with Bob Marley.
Sure, I've heard of him.
But to the North American ears, it might be a little too often I wouldn't say simple, but the orchestration is basically an acoustic guitar, horns, and a beatbox. So it's music for people that don't have a lot of means, but that are very passionate. And it's one of those rare albums where basically you have to be bilingual, almost trilingual to get all the jokes, because it's filled with humor, but it's sung in English, Spanish, French, or whatever language he feels like at that moment. So it's one of those albums you might want to listen to with Google Translate in the background, trying to translate everything that you're hearing.
Sure.
And it's full of guitar riffs that are really reggae inspired. There's a chorus in the back that can't stop singing, and Manu Chao is basically rambling on about topics that are really important to him, not necessarily to the listener, from politics to marijuana. So it was rebellious in 2001. I'm not sure if it's really rebellious in 2019, but it still sounds good to me. And it brings a little flavor to our desert island.
Your desert island.
Yeah. We're not on this with you, unfortunately.
Well, you're a few islands
A few islands over.
over in
I'll
the
hear
east.
Metallica at 6 a.m.
Yeah.
And my last one is Back to Black by Amy Winehouse. So we tend to forget, because right nowadays when you say Amy Winehouse, all you see is the poor woman that was hounded to death by the tabloids. And although it hasn't been proven, some people say her dad basically sold her corpse to the tabloids to a certain extent. Like he encouraged the drinking. But when you listen to Back to Black, what you're hearing is basically this young woman who's really funny, hip, and who created an instant classic. Producer Mark Ronson had a band of devoted souls that basically created an album that sounded like something out of the 40s, 50s, 60s, but that had an hip-hop edge. And you had this little girl, basically a whiff of a woman, who was 23 at that point, had a beehive crown on her head, was white as a sheet. And nobody thought she could even make a sound. And you heard this huge voice coming out of her. And basically she, to a certain extent, relaunched R&B, which at that point had become a little too comfortable. And she also opened the door to pop oddballs like Lily Allen, Lady Gaga, and a bunch of others that
that's
are
a good point.
like
Yeah,
she's
she
now
opened,
done.
she opened the door for those girls.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And so basically, that's my last album. My Winehouse and her "fuck me pump stride back on one day" kind of attitude.
This
Well-
is I like this. Sorry. Ian, go
I was going
ahead.
to say, she was the real thing. Most singers, most artists aren't. They're derivative. They're put together by Band-Aids and tape, whatever it is, by producers, they're exhibition. I don't know what it is. But when you see and hear the real thing, you kind of go, ah. Well, Amy Winehouse was the real thing. She could really sing and stylize a song so you believed her. They once asked Sinatra, what's the secret of your singing? He said, I believe what I sing. Easy to say, pretty hard to do in a stadium when you're up there with a microphone. He believes what he's singing. Amy Winehouse had that quality. This Tony Bennett, of all people, said she was the real thing. So there's an extra tragedy on top of the personal one.
This is actually a very good list, Wheels. I noticed that you brought a double album of The Clash to make up for the 5-track album of Wish You Were Here.
Although I think it's, a 45 or 50-minute album
Wow,
anyways.
frig, all the songs like an hour each. Like, it's ridiculous. Yeah, this is pretty cool. I don't know about this Manu Chao person. If I was on the island with you, I definitely would use that album to give me an SOS signal to get me out of here. But
I might use it as a frying pan.
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
I don't know about this Manu Chao dude, but no, this is why I like the way we jive, the three of us, because you got Ian with one realm, I go another realm, and then Wheels, you actually bounce off both of us, and then you throw a surprise with Manu Chao.
No, he goes off into space in your own little ground control. I mean, you're up there.
It's probably the lack of oxygen behind the window.
I think as Armando keeps on touching your chest. But the beauty of it is kind of funny is that Wyclef Jean and you go Praz Michael. It's Praz Michel. They're proud Haitians, my friend. And to reflect, that album is a good album to score. And I also want to say the only voices you really hear are Lawrence and Wyclef, because Praz is more like a featuring kind of guy, and he's done a lot of stuff too.
Yeah.
So, but this is awesome. I hope you listeners out there could come up with a list and email it to us at theferriswheelshow@gmail.com. We'd be more than happy to look at it, and if you want,
we'll put it on the air.
Yeah, we'll put it on the air for sure. Thank you for listening. Please send us your thoughts at theferriswheelshow@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at Ferris Wheel Show, Instagram The Ferris Wheel Show, Facebook The Ferris Wheel Show. I'm your host, Ferris Kennedy.
I'm Dr. Ian Clark. YouTube, by the way, too. We're on YouTube.
We are on
You
YouTube.
can find us there.
And Stephen Wheeler.
Have a good night.
Good night. Or good morning.